Welcome to Cursed. I'm Josh or Bones, and I'm joined today by Mortellus, and I'm happy to have you on.
Nice to be here. I'm very excited, as always.
Yeah.
Confused, of course. I never understand why anybody wants to talk to me, but
Well, I think I don't know. We can get into that later, but I feel like death and dying is always going to get people's attention.
probably true. I mean, it's something we're simultaneously terrified of and curious about.
Yes, and I feel like the curiosity stems from that not knowing. I mean, I guess there's some, people that are like, "Oh, I know exactly what's going to happen," but you're still afraid of it. And I think that curiosity and trying to learn about it is that human condition of trying to like quiet like the fear or
Like between being in death care and being a medium and having experienced a near-death experience, I feel like a tour guide to death. Which thing would you like to ask questions about? I'm here for you.
if you would tell everybody kind of about because you've got a book that just came out,
I
uh,
do.
which is what prompted you're probably doing a little tour of guesting here and there.
Well, I'm doing the tour that one can do during a pandemic, which is
Yeah.
mostly from my living room to my kitchen in my pajamas. That's kind of that's the tour. But yeah, do I have to wear black? It came out on February 8th for Llewellyn. Very excited. I'd like to call it a life's work. It isn't. It was like a year of just like horrible working too hard and chasing twin babies and finishing a college degree while
Mhm.
also living in a pandemic. So that was kind of it's
Sounds like
the
you have plenty
birth
of free
story.
time. So you have twins?
I do. I had twins in 2018. They were born on my birthday. Uh,
Oh.
the three of us, our birthday is Beltane, so that very like peak witchcraft. That's the
Yeah. But yeah, I would imagine because then they're like what, two?
Mhm.
Um,
There'll be three.
so three?
There'll be three. Yeah.
Oh, there'll be three, yes. I would imagine that on top of everything else, and it's like, oh, let me just, put the book together during all of this.
Yes, so they were not quite a year old, and I went to Mystic South, the last Mystic South that existed. So sad to hear yesterday that it was officially canceled again for this year. So that was
Oh,
sad. But
yeah, I've never been, but I've planned on it, and then pandemic happened because I started this podcast with the previous host end of 2019. Yeah. So I mean it's going on a year and a half and so Mystic South was like, "Oh, everybody like it would be cool to go to that." And then nope.
nope. Well, when it finally happens, we'll have to have a cup of tea or something in the
Yeah.
weird part of the night that people aren't sure if it's like still night or if it's morning because that's when I'm that's when I'm awake.
Right. Yeah, I'm usually the nocturnal one that hangs out at weird hours or can't sleep or gets woken up at 3.
Exactly. But yeah, I had just had the twins and I'd gone to Mystic South and I joke that I accosted a Llewellyn editor, like, make somebody write a book about this thing that makes me mad. And here I am. I'm happy to tell your listeners if they find a typo, it's probably a toddler's fault. They spent the whole time I was writing it like slapping the keyboard and
They were
yelling.
helping.
They were helping, doing their part.
Yeah, so the book before we go into what that covers, your I guess all your titles and stuff. You're a mortician.
I am, well, as much as one can be right now. I sort of graduated mortuary school and again went right into COVID-19. So ordinarily you finish mortuary school and you do your apprentice stuff and your licensing stuff and go on about your life. And I immediately went into the medical reserve corps to
A pandemic, yeah.
volunteer. So that's been kind of my thing for the last 2 years, it just being on call for whoever needs me and going here and there. And just like it feels like having your whole life on pause. So
Yeah, that's I can't even imagine like just coming out and being like into this is just, kind of thrown to the wolves kind of thing.
It's sort of hilarious too, because I mean, it's not like I was an unexperienced person, the sort of the trajectory of death care is you're doing it the whole time you're learning it, you're
Hmm.
working, and it's been my life for a long time, but you expect you're going to graduate and walk across and get your certificate or whatever and go on and do all your stuff and be done. And it's like, no, your whole life is on pause. You'll do more work than you ever imagined for like 2 years, and none of it will count toward a single requirement that you need to live your life. So that's a fun challenge.
Right. Well, I mean, it is a different time. I mean, I work in healthcare, so it was like, things got weird, things changed with that. Um, I mean, there's like a hole for all of these things. I don't know if that's just because, you know, there's healthcare hiring freezes and all this stuff, but um, yeah, that's an interesting thing, I guess, to think about is like coming out of a trade or a school or program like that, you can't just pick up and start apprenticing. If that is that the right term for it?
It's sort of like a residency program.
Residence. That's what I'm
Every
thinking.
state has one. So you know about that with like nurses and things. They do their
Right.
residencies, they get their license, they go on.
Yes.
So we sort of went directly from school to Department of Health and Human Services really needs you. We're scared.
Right.
And it's like, I've probably done more work in the last 2 years than I ever would have imagined doing in any sort of apprenticeship or residency. And zero of it counts for any of my requirements.
Hopefully they make an exception, but
Like a lot of states did exceptions like that for nurses and things. They just like waived all their licensing requirements and stuff. And
guess what? You're licensed now. Go to
correct.
floor 5.
Right. That's sort of where we are, which
You
is
get like grandfathered in if you start in a pandemic. But
that you should, yes.
you're also I was joking because I found out you're like a neighbor. You're
Yes.
not far from us in Western North Carolina, and I'm in the process of editing, which will come out tomorrow, the week before that. But with Old Gods, and they're like our neighbors too. So it's like it's been a very Western North Carolina like podcast month. So can't complain though. There's a lot of cool people in this area.
It's true. I hope to find excuse to talk to Steve one day other than just being on Facebook and never interacting, but I do love the podcast. It's a
Well,
great
Steve is great, and both of them are pretty down to earth. And I found out Cam was Hecatean, which is really cool. And she's like, "Oh yeah, Jake Richards is a fan and all that." So it's a small little pagan Appalachian world, right?
well, your viewers or your listeners can't see, but I've got all my deity swag on right now. My
Yeah, they won't see this because this is on a, you know,
I mean, I'm a huge fan of The Wicked and the Divine, which is a comic series that ended a couple years ago. And so for those listening, I have on a t-shirt like listing all the deities from that comic. So
and now you're also a priestex of
Gardnerian Wicca, yes. Third
um,
degree, run a teaching coven in big old Rutherfordton, North Carolina. I pronounced it out, so clearly I'm not from here. I am though.
yeah, it's Ruffton.
Rolfton,
Um,
Relfton, Relafordton, depending on what part of the county you live in.
yeah, when we were talking about having you on, it's like, oh yeah, you do ghost hunting in a sense. I don't think you would probably. I say ghost hunting because I feel like that's what people are familiar with, but technically we're not hunting anything.
I think it's even weirder when I don't know, everybody experiences mediumship differently. And I really don't even like that word because it sort of implies something really passive where I prefer necromancy. It's a choice. I'm actively working toward whatever I'm doing, but when you're interacting with spirits in a really personal way, like just sort of seeing them like you would other ordinary people or interacting with them like that, it feels funny to say you're hunting them. It'd be like saying I'm going to hunt my friend at Walmart. It's like
right.
that's
Which, to
all
be fair, you might have to do.
I'm gonna go meet some undead people at this location. That's what.
And you can't say necromancy because I do want to like get into kind of because that's a topic I've not touched on here before per se. I mean, I had Corey on and we talked about like corpse magic, which by extension would be but I feel like that's a loaded word for people.
It
When you
really
say
is.
necromancy, you feel like, oh my God, you're, bringing, reanimating corpses and, um, and that's like the PG stuff part of it. But,
Mhm.
and actually, I feel like more people are necromancers, especially on the witchcraft path, than they would understand. I mean, or they would realize, because it's really just communication and working with the dead.
Or
But I
the
would love to know, like, how you describe it and how you're in your practice.
Oh gosh, that's such a big question, and people ask me that often, and I always feel like I'm saying the wrong thing. I feel like, to harken back to what I said previously, I feel like there's this polarity of life and death that we work with, particularly in crafts like Wicca, where you're working with two deities, and I don't get into that whole like gendered nonsense. So that's sort of my vibe, life, death. Those are the poles I'm working with,
Death
and
is genderless.
death is gender. It comes for everybody. So I feel like necromancy is anything that is inclined toward that magic of death, the underworld, those descents, that kind of stuff. I don't think there's really any such thing as good or bad or black or white or evil or benevolent magic. I think that if anything was ever neutral, it's death, right?
Right. Yeah, the great equalizer.
Right. If you look back into history, anything pre 1300s, you're gonna find that necromancy was a word that was really broadly used to define most kinds of magic. You couldn't really separate those things out at all. And it really wasn't until Catholics got a hold of it that it became very digging corpses up and by the way, everything is demons somehow. Like
They like to do
Catholics ruin
that.
they ruin everything. That's the problem. But
Right.
really for me, it's about working with those energies.
Yeah, as somebody who works with Hecate, I mean, I was familiar with that kind of early on. And whether you use the term medium or not, I'm sensitive in a sense where sometimes I'm like, oh, I really can't. But then I realize I have this ongoing interaction and communication with my spirit familiar. Um, and it's like, well, you're still talking like, it's like, if you have one friend, you're as social as you're going to be with that one friend. And you have acquaintances and stuff, but usually she's kind of that go-to between feeling and communicating within a place.
Mhm.
And that could be because she's got control issues, maybe. But no, but it's kind of like I feel like it's that give or take. I've had people that say they're jealous of that, but that was a hard thing in the beginning before I knew what it was, and um, I feel like I've got that, but there's so many different ways. So I've been familiar with that idea of necromancy in the sense of it's not scary, it's not anything like grave robbing and zombies and all this shit. But it's a cool aesthetic. But no,
I mean, I guess we can count zombies if you count me on like a Saturday morning trying to get some
right,
caffeine in me.
yeah.
That's
But yeah, I feel like that's something I'll have to do a dedicated episode about, and maybe have you back on and just like cover that. But
I would love that. Yeah.
really, what we want to talk about is the book, because I feel like I haven't got to read it yet, and we tried to get you on here as it. I knew it just released like what 2 weeks ago,
Mhm.
um,
Pretty much. Yeah.
and I feel like it covers a bunch. I don't know all that it covers, of course. I haven't read it yet, but um, it covers a lot of things. I think me, myself, and others, whether you call yourself pagan, a witch, are kind of like, yeah, what do you do? Because it's kind of that. I feel like the that whole area has been, especially in this country, taken over by religion so much, and it's all like, I mean, from well, what kind of tombstone do you want? Do you want Jesus hands on it? Do you want a cross on it? It's like no, but your book deals with, I guess, the approach from what a pagan viewpoint of like how to put all that in order.
So I kind of I feel like I once again described this terribly. That's my catchphrase. Doing badly at saying stuff. Um, when I was a student, I was slapped pretty hard in the face with the um, just sort of that cold reality of what the bias was. And it was shocking to me to see how just sort of aggressively open people were about being anti-pagan. And that was tough. I want to talk about a couple years of just biting your tongue every minute, just
I bet.
trying to get through your day. And I realized sort of right away there were a few problems. One, the stereotypes are so strong, not just how they viewed us as pagans, but how we view them as death care workers. We have this idea that every funeral director is just sort of like this grifter who's spooky and out to, you know, rob your wallet, like, because that's how movies portray them, right?
Yes.
So we have perceptions and they have perceptions and they butt heads. And on top of that, it seemed to me like neither group had the language to communicate with the other. So I really wanted to write something that would fill that gap. Students in mortuary school get this book, and I wish I had it next to me, I would show it to you, but it's supposed to teach us every kind of funeral service we could possibly encounter in our career. It's about, a quarter of an inch thick. It's this tiny, tiny little pamphlet. It's this tiny thing. And they're all, you know, Abrahamic faiths and how they function, along with like veteran services and Freemasonry rituals and that kind of stuff. It's really big. There's like 10 things in it. And I'm staring at this and thinking, what the heck? So I wanted to sit down and just create a book like that one that filled in all the gaps. So I've covered everything from front to back, what happens from the second you die to the second you're put in the ground or the crematory, sort of like what things happen to your body along the way, where does it go, who's handling it, what words can you use to interact with that experience, what does a modern funeral, quote unquote, really look like, what options do you have in terms of disposition. I really go into depth for all kinds of options outside of burial and cremation. And then I start breaking it down into chapters for the customs and funerary rites of specific groups, from British traditional Wicca to heathenry to druidry to Discordianism to Thelema. It each has a very in-depth look. I even include crypto-paganism, which has a group of rituals that are either Christian passing or secular passing, depending on what your family is like and what you feel like you have to do. And I really wanted to give grief resources as well. So there are chapters about dealing with the loss of a child, or the loss of a companion animal, or someone who's dying of a long-term illness, or suicide deaths or other unexpected deaths. So big, boring, thick, chunky resource.
But I feel like it's a good resource that I've never seen before, and I feel like a lot of people would benefit from, because I mean, that's not, like I said, it's not something common. I mean, just the fact, like, the book you got did not mention any of this. It's like, well, what else could there be? There's these 10, and you know, other than just like, well, dig a shallow hole and throw me out there. Like, there's no good thing, because it's, I don't know. I feel like it reminds me of kind of like the idea, I guess now that's a little bit less, but like with a wedding, it's like, what church are you going to get married at, especially in the South, you know, where, you know, what are you going to do there? What are you going to have with this? What are you going to do with that? And it's like, everything does have that, that Christian bias. And of course, you know, your big three Abrahamic religions, you're going to get like, oh, well, I'm sure they know that, but it's like, I mean, this is going to be left on, who knows? Like, what if you're a solitary practitioner and you're the only one and your family has no idea. I feel like a fear would be, and I don't know if that's just mine. I'm not saying I'm like solitary, and I feel like my family would honor it depending on, but at the same time where it's like, are y'all gonna do this though? Are y'all
Mhm.
gonna do this? Or are you gonna like um try, are you going to be like, no, we can't do that, we're having it done like this and that? And it, I think it's a fear, especially for those practitioners that are practitioners that don't, that have a super religious family, that might be worried about like, well, are they going to really fulfill my wishes like I want them to? I need to be very specific, but where do you start?
Yeah. And I think that was a big thing for me as well. Like there's an entire chapter in there on advanced planning and just sort of figuring out who your legal next of kin is. It helps you sort out exactly who's in charge when you die. Right now, if I died this second, who would be in charge? And it helps you sort of figure out the ins and outs of how to make sure that's a person that you want it to be, how to legally arrange. It talks a lot about wills and advance directives and that sort of stuff. But I really wanted it to be something that any person could pick up and find something they needed. It's not just for pagan folk trying to plan a funeral for someone else or for themselves. It's for death care professionals who need a guide to what those services look like. If death care folks are good at anything, it's following instructions. You put a guide in front of us, we go, okay, we know what to do. So I wanted it to look the way they need it to look. And there's a section in each chapter for a person who might be a guest. So you die, your family could pick that up and go to the guest section for the faith closest to you and go, okay, this is what they need of me. There are little solitary rituals in there for someone who might not be a heathen, for example, but their friend was, and they want to honor them in the correct way, or things like that. And I wanted it to fill lots of needs.
It sounds like it does, because I guess that's something that before having you on, I was thinking it was for the pagan reader or the, but it, I mean, to have it directed to people like you that do what you do, which would make sense because that's the perspective you're writing it from. But yeah, maybe one day it'll be included in the optional textbooks for the program. They're like, well,
I believe just today I put a copy in the mail to a mortuary sciences program at a university for their library. So that's
nice.
exactly where it's going, and that's exactly what I hoped it would be. But yeah, I found myself thinking a lot at the time that I was writing it about my own spouse. So I'm British traditional Wiccan, and that's an initiatory oath-bound craft. So he can't know anything about what I'm doing because he's not that. And what happens if I die? How does he get to honor me in a way that makes sense to me and to him?
And you
And
hand him like this tome of like, here it is, and he's like, wait, what?
how does he explain that to a funeral home? How does he explain that to friends? How do guests at that funeral, like, what they're probably sitting there thinking, what do I wear? How do I act? What do I do? So every single chapter really covers that stuff. Like, your British traditional friend just died. Here's what you need to know. When you're attending this kind of funeral and you're not that, and you've never been there before, here's what clothes to wear, and here's what you can expect for meals and stuff. And I go into things like, hey, funeral director, here's the kind of casket they're gonna want, and all the boring nitty gritty that we all need. I should stop calling it boring. It's really not, but it's detailed.
Right. It's like a textbook, and not so much just a, but I mean, it sounds like it's a good, it's a good resource depending on, I guess, or not depending on, but you, it sounds like you thought about so many different aspects of like, from friends to family to the directors to all this, and there's just a lot that I feel like I haven't even thought of before, which I'm not saying like, oh, I'm staring down. I mean, I'm 35. But like, and in the pandemic, I think too, kind of like, oh shit, I mean, there's so much unexpected loss. It's, young people, and I'm not saying that that doesn't happen, of course, but it isn't like, well, I need to think and worry about this when I get older. If it's something that your path is that's important to you, it's like I for one know my family have no idea about kind of like what I would want and expect because they just they have their one set. It's like Southern Baptists, like this is how we all gonna be buried, and it don't matter how you bury or cremate me because Jesus is coming back. But since he's not, like, what do you do?
So you get a copy of this book and you put a post-it note on the section that reflects your wishes. You
Right,
give
yeah,
it to them.
yeah. Um,
Yeah, and you're right though. I think a lot of people, we really, really rely on death care workers, funeral professionals to know all those details and help us with them. But when you have this huge gap in your perspective, that sucks, right? Like you need an ally who understands your beliefs to help put those details in order for you. So that was, I felt, an area that we really needed. We needed more. So I hope I was able to accomplish it. We'll see. We'll see if it.
so were you basically just like, this book needs to exist, I'm gonna do it, and y'all are gonna hear me out, or were you approached after doing something like that? Um, Say
How
at
was I?
Mystic South, yeah, like if they were like, oh,
Oh Lord, I mixed bag. Believe me, there. Some people hate me for writing it, and some people love it. Just the 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 older set in the funeral industry. It's just like the older set anywhere. They don't want anything to change.
right.
So I think their thought process is, oh Lord, another person with boobs wrote a book that we have to deal with, and that's
And they're weird, and they're not an old white guy. I don't know.
right.
I don't think
Yes,
we're gonna listen to them.
it's like the books that have made the most sort of change in the funeral industry, like Jessica Mitford's American Way of Death back in the 70s. Of course, Caitlin Doughty with Smoke Gets in Your Eyes sort of stirred the pot a bit, and then now this one will we'll see if I'm the new thing to complain about. I've definitely gotten a few.
Yeah, that's funny. It's just like, oh, they're out of Rufton and shaking up the whole scene.
Doing my best. My grandma used to tell me, if you don't stir the pot once in a while, the soup burns.
Oh, that's a good one because it does.
Hmm.
Were you a mortician and then I guess decided? I'm trying to think of how to word this. Or I mean, I would assume which came first. Were you, I guess, practicing with necromancy and all this stuff, and thought, I really want to. Of course, you came first because you said you. But it's like, at what point were you like, no, this isn't good enough? Just working in this, I'm gonna actually go do mortuary school and all the other stuff.
I guess the funny way to put it is, I was dead to begin with. That's the that's the start of this story. There's your podcast episode title. That's I I had an experience when I was a kid, and I was dead for about 8 minutes. I was in a
Oh my
coma for
gosh!
4 days. I'll skip over the trauma story that leads up to it. I've told it on other podcasts that you should all go listen to and support. Um, but I had a really bad, desperately bad experience, and my good old Baptist minister was talking about the sin of suicide on Sunday morning, and telling us all how, if you kill yourself, you don't get to see your family or your church family anymore, or anybody that loves you, and you don't get to interact with them. And I thought, that sounds great.
Right
Let's
now, don't
do
you feel better?
it. So I went directly home that night and ate a bottle of heart pills that I had been told were not candy and not for eating. And in reality, I was found on the floor the next morning and spent 4 days in a coma in Rutherford Hospital. And during that, I lost consciousness and had to be resuscitated. I was legally dead for about 7 to 8 minutes, give or take. But what happened during that time was that I had this entire experience of descending into the underworld and from my perspective, I was there for years. Like I spent a lifetime there.
Oh wow.
And then I woke up with this like bald doctor standing over me with their belt out, like, you do something like that again, I'll personally give you a spanking or whatever. And you know how people are in the South.
Yeah.
was my that was what was happening to me at age 5. So um yeah, it really affected who I was as a person. And you were talking about interacting with your familiar spirit. So you're using them sort of like a control spirit. Lots of mediums do that. They have this intercessor to
Oh,
help them communicate with the dead. Um, but I don't need one of those at all. Um, I don't know. I often joke that I'm still a little bit dead, sort of energetically. I'm somewhere in between.
yeah. I feel like that can't happen to you. You can't spend years in the underworld and then not be a liminal creature when you come back.
Right. So I sort of feel like some people describe interacting with the dead or other places like you're in the living room and the dead are in the kitchen, one room over from you. You're aware of the wall. You can shout to them and you might get a glimpse as they pass by the doorway, right? Now, if someone is standing in the doorway for you, like you're familiar, you can use them to shout a message in for you,
Yeah,
right?
go tell them to do something.
Right. For me, that is more like looking out a screen door. I'm aware of the mesh, but you know, I'm just looking at the yard. It's a little different for me.
Yeah, I can see that. It's not as the wall, as you put it, isn't as solid. Um,
Exactly. Yeah.
and you don't have to. I likened it on this, talking about working with spirits and, not just hunting them, but with the familiar as well, kind of like when you're wanting to work with spirits around you, whether that spirit's a place, whether it's the animist idea of, plant spirits and animal spirits or human passed on spirits, or like my familiar daemon spirits, all that. Um, it's kind of like sending a message. You could either go directly. If you can't reach that, you could send a letter. Somebody's got to carry that to you, or you're making the phone call. It has to. So there's it's a very similar way, except just a closer idea of like, well, you've got um that little bit of a quicker access. It doesn't mean that you can't, because I think we've talked before when you said, this isn't anything super special or anything super crazy, like, it's just, it is what it is. I mean, it's a
Right.
world, like, partitioned a little bit maybe, but
I always I always tell people, and this is one of the reasons I don't use the word medium and I use necromancer instead because, well, I do necromancy and I don't have a better word for for being a
it
little bit
sounds
dead.
cool.
But I feel like mediums are just really amazing psychics, right? You have your psychic senses, sight and hearing and smell and speech and so on, touch.
Mhm.
And each one of those is a clairsentience, like clairaudience, clairvoyance, and so on. A medium might have all those skills, and your best mediums will. Some might be missing one or two. My I have an adult child, and she jokes that she's the Helen Keller of necromancy because she can hear, but she can't see. Um, which that's a terrible and funny way to put it, but it's true. Like you
Right.
might be missing a sense that you need, and you have to learn to work around that. So like you have your familiar spirit, and that helps you get around some of those roadblocks, right?
Right.
I'm not a psychic at all. I'm actually really terrible at that stuff. I'm just a little bit dead, so I can see them and interact with them as though we're in the same place, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm trying to think because I feel like there's plenty of, movies and shit like this that could probably give you an idea. But for me, I, other than seeing like figures and things kind of out of the peripheral, which I think is very common for a lot of people, whether they realize it or not. That shit gets stronger or we get closer to Samhain. Um, and then I can hear things. I've interacted with the dead in dreams that I don't even know if you could call them dreams, but 100% like it was actual interaction because
I
there's
have
no huh.
I have so many things to say to you right now.
Oh
Okay.
God. But yeah, as far as the familiar, I never realized it's like she'll relay that message of, oh yeah, that tingling on your neck, that's because there's somebody or something right here. And then it's like this transfer of information from her to me of like, could it be that? And it's still very fuzzy. It's something that I've tried to work with, strengthening with her and stuff, but which I actually tried to use her to communicate with Bigfoots and stuff when we were out there, because we were going at it from a not flesh and blood specifically idea, but more of like a nature spirit thing. And so yeah, it's like, well, I don't know how many people are using their familiars to try to talk to Bigfoot, but why not?
You might be surprised. Lots of people use daemons or control spirits as intercessors with spirits of place, so that would fall into the same category. I talk about this in my book. There's a chapter in there called The Underworld, and I talk a bit about sort of my beliefs about the afterlife and where we go when we die and sort of what that experience was for me personally. But I talk about the fact that we hear all these stories about like the tunnel and the light at the end of the tunnel and that sort of thing. That was not at all my experience, not even remotely. For me, it was falling away from light through what felt like water. It felt like falling through the floor, falling through the earth, and then floating downward forever, just sort of looking up at the nightlight in the hallway I died in until I couldn't see it anymore. And it's not air and it's not water, but it's thick.
It's
And
like ectoplasm. No.
this comfortable place that feels like a hug, you know? It's not it was cold, but not uncomfortable. It
Hmm.
was like laying in your bed in that place between awake and dreams, but like the ceiling fan is hitting you just right. You know what I'm talking about? That kind of
Right. Yeah.
feeling. And that was what that place was. This heavy, dark coolness. None of that light at the end of the tunnel stuff for me. I did not see any of that, but that's sort of what traveling in those spaces feels like. And it's what the world feels like to me now, sort of.
Yeah, like you pass through um some kind of, but it never left you, like
It's like I don't know how to describe it. I remember what I felt like as a person before I woke up in that hospital bed, and it's just not the same.
you came
Like
back different to be like Pet
the air
Cemetery.
doesn't taste the same. It just like nothing feels the same. And I've grown used to it and I rarely think about it anymore. But it's like I don't know, it's like being comfortable on the couch and then getting up and trying to shake the pins and needles out of your leg. Like you know something is different and
Mhm.
you just gotta live with that now.
Yeah, like I said, Pet Cemetery, you came back different,
Came back like messed up, like
right? Came back wrong. But yeah, I guess you had 5 years to live in that, and I mean, you would be able to tell the difference, I guess, when you come back. Like there's something that's like always tingly, so to speak.
I remember feeling like I don't know, I remember leaving the hospital and feeling like I had like when you have water on the ear or something, like you just can't quite
Right.
nothing sounds right. And for a long time it felt like something was broken. And it especially felt that way when I realized I could just see things and hear things and the world was not the same to me anymore. But
And you weren't, I guess, for a lack of better word for this, because I'm not sure, but like that sensitivity, you didn't have that before
no, not at
that you
all.
knew of? Okay. I
It
wasn't sure if
sounds
that was,
like a very I see dead people kind of story, but not really. Like it was like going to sleep and waking up in a different world.
yeah, you're like, I am dead people now. I'm not, I don't see them.
Right.
So with your practice, like, I guess, I'm not like, oh, how many years have you done it? But I'm sure you've got quite a bit of that under your belt. Um,
I mean, if you just want to politely ask me how old I am,
no,
I'm
but
38, so I've been doing this for 33 years.
I was curious as to like what what part of that coming back different and being slightly dead, like did that put you on this path, or did what started to be like, oh, I can witchcraft is connected to this? And
I definitely want to I definitely want to encourage your listeners to go read the whole story in my book, or listen to a different podcast where I went all into it. I'll save you all that mess. But um, while I was dead, while I was in the underworld, I met a deity. And that's significant to me because my parents were in a fundamentalist cult and we didn't have TV or radio or books or anything. So this was an experience that was very much unlike anything in my world at the time.
it wasn't tainted because you watched a cartoon or yeah.
Right. I always try and express that to people. Yes, it was a raw experience, but it took me to adulthood and running away from home to discover that the deity that I met was the Morrigan. But I recognized the things that made her her. When I woke up, I knew the crows were important to me. For example, like
Mhm.
I began collecting black feathers. I had little jars full of them, and all the little things that stick with you when you have an experience with a deity or a spirit. But she gave me a message and she told me that I had to go back. I couldn't be dead. That I had work to do, and I had to just go be strong no matter what my life was. That I couldn't be scared about it, and I had to keep on. And I'll keep her full words to me
Of
private,
course.
but I knew what she needed of me. And I've often joked that I came out of that experience a witch, because I certainly wasn't one to begin with, but I came out of it with a magical mindset. I
Right.
had
It's like
seen something, and I had felt something that was different than what I had been told reality was.
yeah. And I mean something at 5, it's like that's I mean, I feel like there was like not maybe a claim, but like that's when it's like, despite, because I feel in doing some of my own personal work and stuff with Hecate, and my demon familiar is obviously connected with that. I was not a witch before I was interacting with my demon familiar. I did not know about Hecate, but these things were just there, and it felt like, despite what you call yourself, despite what you practice, this thing had been with me a long time, probably, if you want to say past life, or like the idea I've been talking about lately is like parallel universe lives alongside it. But it's like that was there um, previously, and whether that's got something to do with like that, or a purpose or some contract you might have signed to come back. I don't know how it all works. I don't pretend to know, but it's funny because even if you didn't practice or ever call yourself a witch, you would still have that experience. You would still have that connection to deity, and you would still have probably the same path, so to speak, and purpose.
Mhm.
Um, because I've gotten into like these ideas of like um, lately, and talked about labels and all this shit that you don't need, and that's not to say that you can't have them. I find witch very empowering for me, but it's not, you're still doing the work whether you call yourself that or not. And I think people can either have that from previous, they can tap into it, they can find it, but like in your case it was kind of like
Right.
yeah.
Deal with this. This is how it is. Yes. And it's funny too, because my birth family definitely understood that something was changed. And
They're like, shit, we lost her.
I more than once got dragged to the front of the church for like a laying on hands or something, where I was like accused of having a spirit of witchcraft about me. you know where I live, you know exactly what cult I was a part of, you can put that together. It's not hard.
Right.
Um, but yeah, it made life really tough for me. And it was definitely not until I ran away from home, 17, 18, that I started figuring myself out and developing sort of a personal solitary practice. And I was late into my 20s before I started seeking in British traditional craft. And, you know, to answer the question you asked a long time ago, I've just been trying to listen to what the messages I was given were and follow that path. You know, I've known that my work was going to be with death since I was very small. And I've done mediumship here and there, just really, once again, I don't love that word. It doesn't really define me very well, but um, helping people where I can. And even if it's weird shit, like walking up to someone in the grocery store on the cereal aisle, like, hey, your dad really wants you to know he left those keys in a coat pocket. It's green. Just go,
Mm.
that kind of junk. And volunteering for hospice for years and years, and then clergy work with funeral. And the message was pretty clear when it was time to go to mortuary school. So I've just been listening.
Yeah, it's like a lifelong career of death. But that's another thing too with whether you want to call them dark goddesses in the which I do, but maybe not in the sense people think. But when you work with them, it's like it's not going to be like a fun and rosy time. It's a very complicated and hard path. And I know we don't have the same paths, but the being asked of things and to feel like you are being asked this and your surrounding does not match it, it's a standing out. I mean, when, for example, when I tell them my story with Ava and my demon familiar, and they're kind of like, oh my gosh, what I wouldn't give to have that like communication. It's like, do you know how like torturous it was to think I had like dissociative identity disorder, schizophrenia, doctors, and I mean, I was super young, and I was like, well, maybe I'm transgender because there's this female voice that will not leave me alone. And at the time, it was like all I knew was Christianity. So it's like this thing said, I'm a demon, and I'm like, oh God, I'm possessed, and I mean, just like maddening. And of course, it came a long way, but it was almost like this, it was very intent and not in a harmful way because it saved me. I mean, I would not be here if I didn't have her kind of giving me a drive when I didn't have any. But it was almost like, no, you're not getting away from this. And now it's a source of like, I mean, it's such a bond, and it's like a soulmate kind of thing. And it's like, yeah, I mean, it's something to be proud of and thankful for, but that doesn't mean it was easy, and that doesn't mean it was a blessing. It was, yeah, it's rough, and I know that's a different kind of parallel, but what I came to find was it was Hecate kind of imparting that this was happening and was going to happen years and years before I even knew her or met her or worked with witchcraft. And then when I started working with Hecate, she was pulled away, and that was a whole other thing. So, I mean, in the last several years, of course, it's been kind of like calm and learning how to work with that witch familiar dynamic, but um, it was there, and it wasn't by my choice. You know what I mean? And it's like, that's kind of what it's like working with Hecate, I feel like, and probably the Morgan and others as well. It's kind of like this is a purpose, and it's for something good. And I mean, I've done, I won't say death work, but on behalf of, I had my adopted father who was sick and dying around a Hecate's night. I remember, and we were estranged. It was hard, and it was like when I heard he passed, it was, I took a moment to kind of say, yeah, but like, what can I do with that connection and my connections with this? Like, he lived a troubled life. Our relationship was troubled. Um, and it's just like, but it felt like a responsibility for him. Um, and for me, maybe that was partly closure. I don't know. But it's shit that it just didn't feel like, well, it doesn't matter if you want to do it. Like, do it. It was like that, that call, I guess. So it's not easy. It's not necessarily glamorous, but I think it's necessary. I think what you do is necessary. The book sounds very necessary for so many practitioners and not and all that. So I'm excited that it exists, and that you had the call to do something like that.
It's so funny too, because I didn't mean to be writing a book. I'm not an author. I didn't mean to be blogging on Pathos.
Right.
I'm not so special or interesting, really, truly. But yeah, sometimes it's just about listening and being at Mystic South, and Llewellyn was there taking pitches, and had I didn't have people walking in with like reams of paper, and they've got chapters and they're all prepared and they've got pitches and speeches and whatever. And I literally didn't even mean to be walking into that room, and said words for a minute. And before I knew it, I was writing this book. And
Yeah, it's like a something channel. It's like just push you in there, past the line of, you know,
I followed a pretty girl with a clipboard in there.
they'll get you.
But no, it's just sort of listening to these messages you're getting and just following and letting your spirit be tugged in whatever direction it has to go. That takes a lot of trust. And you were talking about not being sure if you had, some sort of hallucination or something like that. I too had that experience. I mean, we have to be skeptical of experiences, magical experiences, paranormal experiences, because otherwise we're just falling down the rabbit hole of,
Yeah.
right, it's bad. Question everything, people. It's good for you.
Yes.
I'd been in therapy for years before I finally told my therapist about those experiences, because I had zero trust in even myself. I just knew I was sick, that I was going to be on pills before the day was over. Like, it was going to be terrible. And luckily, I had a really great therapist who, though not a magical thinker herself, was willing to listen to what I had to say. And on the day that I told her everything, she sits there, she listens quietly, she takes notes, whatever.
She's taking a lot of notes.
A lot of notes. Oh no. Just a lot of jotting happening over there. I'm really concerned about that. And when I was done, she changes her, how people readjust themselves. They're about to tell you something. I was like, hang on. Before you pull out your prescription pad, will you indulge me one small thing? She was like, yeah, sure. I was like, I'd really like to talk to you about your grandmother, who's been in every session that I've had with you. And she listened quietly while I told her what they had to say, what they looked like, and what their life had been, and how they had spoken to me all that time. And by the end, she was crying. She tore that page out of her legal pad, threw it in the trash can, and said, I don't think that needs to go in your file.
Oh, wow. Because she was about to make a phone call, probably, like.
I've joked at times that I'm like the only therapist sanctioned medium.
Right. Yeah.
In Rutherford County, at least.
Yeah. And you'll never know, because that didn't go into my permanent record. But yeah, that's I can't imagine what it was like for somebody like that to maybe have this preconceived, and I'm not saying that doesn't exist and she's not a great therapist, because I think too many times people throw especially when you're talking about paranormal and witchcraft, it's hard. Sometimes mental illness is kind of thrown out with, oh, it's like you need to do shadow work, or you need to do this and you need to do that, or it could be, oh, there's nothing wrong with you, blah blah, blah. And I feel like there's a fine line. I mean, between friends I have, between myself, it's like, okay, then why? I'm just doing this for attention. This thing's obviously like
Right.
talking to me, and then it's kind of like, but it's not stopped talking this entire time, like that I'm telling myself and making it up. It's like, yeah, okay.
Isn't like imposter syndrome great, where you can just sit there and be like, I this is a mental illness in collection with the other ones I have, because
Right.
I'm fucked up. I have
Yeah.
depression. I have PTSD, and I've got problems, and I go to therapy, and all of that is good and fine and wonderful. And there's literally no shame in saying I have things about me that I have to work on, and there's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with having mental illnesses, and they're real. And take
Yeah.
your medication, people. A walk in the woods is not enough.
Right.
Shadow
Um,
work is not going to fix your depression,
yeah,
but
sleeping with quartz is not going to help you.
right,
Um, and it
just
doesn't mean that you're not experiencing things too, but at the same time, yeah, it's not. And that's what I think is for me was kind of one of those things where even now I've seen, heard, sent, other people have seen, spoken with, channeled. I mean, it's as far as you could measure it in a personal experience and others around you. And I still will be like, did I make this bitch up? Does she really exist?
oh my god.
Even though like she's done it. And I mean, that's the same thing where it's like, I don't even need to have a podcast because what do I know about witchcraft? It's only been like 11 years. What do I know about Hecate? And I mean, it's never enough to say I know things because I don't. It's an ongoing thing. But then when I started doing the more investigating, like more seriously, I was like, oh my God, I'm just like, I feel like I'm so new to this and nobody's going to take me serious. It's like, but I've been doing this since my 20, like my early 20s, like even if it was just
Good enough, right?
right. And it's like, okay, now I get to have imposter syndrome on, my mental state and witchcraft and paranormal experience and research and all that. But, I feel like that's always going to be there. Sometimes you just have to go with it and trust it. Um, so the fact that you ended up like writing a book and like not, planning on it, it's kind of like, it is what it is. It's out there now.
Right. And,
And
and
you,
I use that. I mean, God, that's the motivational speech, right? If I can write a book, people, literally anyone can do it. If Llewellyn will publish my book and write me editor notes, like, could you reel back on how many times you said fuck? That was like,
yeah.
you
Um,
too can be a published author just to write words down. You can you can do
right. Yeah, and they're like, "Well, I mean, we're just doing this because you kind of scared us." No, I know how you are at cons, but no,
They're really wonderful people there, truly.
no,
Llewellyn's great, and I'm just so delighted to be working with them, and they've been so good to me.
right. And real quick, the other funny thing is like after we scheduled this, because there's so many synchronicities that happen. I remember connecting with you on Twitter, and I wasn't even aware that you were writing a book, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I would love to have you on, and we definitely need to talk about this." And um, the podcast went through changes and then it ended up being guest driven and I was like, let me collect all these people that have been kind of on hold. And I do not use Twitter much. I try so hard, and I was always like, well, if Trump can do it, but I can't. I can't. And
I don't understand Twitter at
I don't
all.
really either. And I'm like, but I'm still trying, at least for the networking part. And I'm like, I do it with the podcast all the time. People probably think I'm just spam. Like, let me use my personal, like with 20 followers. But and Meg with Witch with Me, like we had just started with Hex Files doing the Witch with Me TV, and Meg's like, do you know Mortellus? Have you talked to Mortellus? Do you want to talk to Mortellus? She's got a book. And I was like, yeah, actually I was gonna pick a day with her like months ago, and then so much stuff happened between then and then here we are. And then
How
so
could you live in my backyard practically?
I
That's
know.
it's so weird.
Yeah, and then we're talking and we like know certain people for better or worse. They were like, oh yeah. But no, it's so cool doing this and like connecting with people. So but I'm glad that you took the time to have on. I think we're like at an hour now, so I won't keep you too long. But we do want to plug your stuff. So do you
Oh
have a
god.
website? Obviously the book.
Is this the part where your listeners have to picture me like patting the top of a used car, like,
Yeah. This baby will get you at
look
least
how
to the
much
underworld.
look how much content we can. I will just say to your listeners, if they're interested in hearing more of what I got going on, and for the life of me, I wouldn't know why. You can look up A Crow in the Dead pretty much anywhere, and you'll find me, or mortellus.com, because I have a named website like a dork. So
I'll link it all too. It'll make it easy.
I do have a little shop on there where I sell goods that might be difficult for other practitioners to get a hold of, like actual coffin nails that came from actual coffins.
Oh,
Um,
see, I was just talking about how I need to get some of those. So let me head over there before
uh,
anybody else gets them.
corpse water and that kind of stuff, like authentic death goods that might be difficult for you to find. So I make those available just because I have access. I'm sort of an accidental shop person, but it's there as a resource if you need it.
I've got all these bones. Um,
Um, if you need to find a pagan friendly funeral person in your area, I have a group on Facebook where we keep that info. You can find it at A Crow on the Dead also. So see, I'm real easy to find. I made it super easy for you.
right.
Uh, Terrible sales pitch, right? It's terrible.
No, no, that's great because I mean that makes it easy, and I'll put like your link down, and at least a book link.
Wherever you enjoy buying books, you can find it. I hope you'll recommend it to funeral homes and hospice in your local hospital and libraries. That's great. We got to get it in people's hands. That's what's
Yeah,
important.
spread it. Yeah, buy 2 copies, take one of them, and hawk it to your like library or
For anyone interested, I do have 2 workshops coming up next month. I'm doing a class on spirit communication and a class on basic necromancy. So if you want to learn some tips and tricks and stuff,
let's see, this will come out the 19th. So is that still good for?
oh yeah, spirit communication class is on April 10th at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and the necromantic practice workshop is on April 24th at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and that's a week before my birthday. So come say hi, bring cake. It'll be fun.
Yeah, and this will be out in time for all that, so it'll be fun.
I always, for listeners, I always like to tell people I feel like knowledge belongs to everyone. So if those workshops are something you're interested in, or there's a service or good on my website that you need and you have a financial barrier, please just reach out to me privately at acrowandthedead@gmail.com, and I will make sure you get that at no cost.
I love that because that's such a good, that's such a good offer for
Hey,
for
we're all just people doing the best we can. So
yeah. And that's the other thing too is like, you're obviously not you're making money off a book, maybe. I mean, authors don't make money, let's be honest, but it's more about the passion and having it out there. So yeah, spread the word if you're listening and you know somebody that could use this, or yeah, I feel like it needs to be a standard.
I think I heard that the average author makes like $2,700 on a book. I've seen 0 pennies. It'll be a long time before I see any sort of royalties. I'm not worried about that. But I'm also not rich. So if you're listening and you want to support someone who can't afford to take a workshop, there are links to that on my FAQ on my website, as well as my Pathos blog. And thank you for having me today. I really enjoyed chatting with you.
Yeah, we'll have to, when there's no pandemic, we'll have to go check out the hospital, the the local hospital, and different things. As we even talked about, oh, when we go out and we might need a not a medium, but
Somebody a little bit dead.
right. We need to, someone that's slightly dead for this, for like hex files and the investigations and stuff. So yeah, we'll have to hang out whenever there's not COVID. So thanks so much for coming on, and we'll talk to you later.
Thanks. I look forward to coming back one day soon.
Okay. Bye,
Bye,
everybody.
everybody.